Well, this is Guns, Knives, and Watches, and I just made a video on the SR22 and probably shouldn't have uploaded it because I really, honestly, was not into making that video. You can kind of tell if I really get into a gun or if I really get into something as far as my speech pattern, my this, my that, da-da-da-da-da. Anyway, these are guns that I actually am into, and if you really want to get into shooting Ruger pistols and you want to get into something that is, you know, an accurate, reliable, everything else. I'm not saying that the SR22 isn't reliable, but the Ruger Mark series has a history behind it that goes back for a long way. I mean, they've been used by militaries, da-da-da-da-da. They've been modified, this, that, or the other. I mean, it's you can't argue about it. Now, what I want to talk to you right now about is a race dragon. What is a race dragon? Now, typically, a race dragon is a 22 pistol that is a modified competition pistol, normally, that can be used in a wilderness environment to hunt with. That is the way we used to use it, and that is what I use as a term. I know a lot of people do a lot of different things, but that's kind of our deal. Now, race dragons normally will have optics on them like this Ruger Mark III. Of course, this Ruger Mark III is highly modified. It has a Tactical Solutions upper on it. It's a 4.5-inch barrel. That barrel is a little small, but it has the ability to thread it. It has a threaded barrel, sorry, as has the ability to suppress it. So with a 4.5-inch barrel and a suppressor on it, it makes this gun, a usable option. Normally, when you suppress a longer barreled gun, have longer than a 4.5-inch barrel, it can turn a 22s start going supersonic. So if you really want to try to stay subsonic and not get that crack, you really need to have as short a barrel kind of as possible. 3.5 inches are popular, like on the Walther. If you have the longer Walther, you know that it goes supersonic, even if you have a suppressor on it. But the 4.5-inch barrel is about as short a barrel as I really want to run because it's called a 22 long rifle, folks. That means it's using rifle powder in it, and that's a slow burn powder, and it requires length on the barrel. Now, this one is kind of a modern representation of it because it is a Mark III. How we tell it's a Mark III is it has a magazine release here. Because this has a ProLite Tactical Solutions upper on it from Boise, Idaho, it does not have the actual loaded chamber indicator, which I'm okay with being without. But you can do a race dragon, and normally the race dragons that I will carry out into the field tend not to have optics on them. Why? Just because it's making it simple, more simple for me, and also it makes it more difficult to shoot. I mean, you're shooting an iron sight gun. So let's move the highly modified race dragon out of there and get back into what they're really intended for, or intended to be, which are these Ruger Mark IIs. This was the original type of race dragon. It was, there were some that were made with 5-inch barrels, but then we figured out that you really needed a longer barrel, and the longer barrel gave you more bullet velocity, a little bit less flash, but it gave you a longer sight radius. So we tended to always go back to these competition target models of the Ruger Mark II. Now, that's where we started. Then, of course, we would replace the grips. These are Hogue grips, wraparound, and one thing that the wraparound gives you, other than just a better feel and everything in your hand, it takes your hand off of this metal here, and in cold environments, it's not sucking all the heat out of your hand. What else would we do? Of course, we would do trigger jobs on them. We would highly modify the interiors. Now these original Mark IIs, all you'd really have to do is do a extremely good trigger job, get it down to where it's, you know, less than 2.5 pounds. Between 2.5 are really where I like it. If it's about 1 3/4, 1.5, I really am not big into it. So if you want to put a Volquartsen kit in one to make it into a race dragon, my advice is mess with your springs, as far as your hammer spring and your plunger spring on your trigger, and a few other things, and just make sure you're using the heavier one. And you can squeeze it between your fingers and tell. I mean, they have lighter springs, they have heavier springs, Pick the one that's heavier. That's what I tend to do. Tends to make also the gun more reliable when it's dirty. You know, you can have a super light trigger pull and this, that, or the other, and you know, things start to get some grit and grime and all this, that, or the other, and then we start having problems, Houston. Gun's not functioning correctly, trigger's not resetting, things aren't happening correctly, because we've got goo in the mix, man. Now, of course, this gun used to have an actual rail on top of it. I lost the screws, so I put black screws in it. I'm committing blasphemy, and you can sit there and see that. But also on this Mark II, I changed the front sight out, as I've gone over in previous videos. Of course, those videos aren't up anymore, and I'm happy, joy for that. And because the original Mark II was it's a fish hook almost, man. You could go get a whale with that thing, man. But those are, you know, that's the beginning of a race dragon. Then if you want to put an optic on it, you have the option, because your competition target, besides having the longer barrel, besides giving you more velocity, besides having the longer sight radius, was also drilled and tapped for the Ruger bases. Of course, you can put other types of tops on them that are similar to, this is actually a Tactical Solution Picatinny rail on it. Now you can see the rear sight is actually a part of that rail, which gives you the ability to use the sights. You know, that options are good. I mean, I'm not going to sit there and tell you that options aren't good, because the more options you have, you know, as long as you're not overcomplicating the works, you know, the more successful you have the opportunity of being. Now, one thing about that, when I talk about sights, I'm talking about putting an aim point on it. Now, if you put a 2 minute of angle aim point on top of this gun, I understand the cost of the gun, the cost of the parts, and this, that, or the other, and then you start putting an expensive optic on it. But what you can do is you can put a pro. They have the aim point pros out now, which are 2 MOAs, and then take the spacer out of them to lower them down, mount it on top of there with a Picatinny, and you're good to go. And it's a little more cost effective, instead of spending yada dollars on whatever. You know, it's not the lightest setup, but when you're hunting with a pistol, the weight gives you a lot of stability, because it wants to counteract any of that momentum that you're putting into the weapon. Now, that was the Mark II Race Dragon without optics. We came back to the Mark III. Looks like a Mark II, looks like the same gun. I just did the switcheroo on you. No, the Mark II and the Mark III are vastly different, but it's always over on this side of them. You push the magazine release, there you go. We've got a loaded chamber indicator, which kind of can give you some problems when they start getting gummed up, because they'll create a little bit of drag there if you get any dirt in there. And any drag on a round that is as unreliable or irregular as far as manufacturing, like a 1022 is, or like a 1022, like a 22 long rifle, is going to give you some type of problems. Now you can see from this one that this trigger, of course, has an over travel stop on it. This is actually the Volquartsen trigger. I don't know, to tell you the God's honest truth, that this gun has a trigger job on it and just has the sear and the trigger off the Volquartsen, or what's going on. But I know it's got the Volquartsen trigger in it. I tend to prefer putting the Volquartsen trigger in it because it has that that stop, and I just get a little extra accuracy out of it because I'm not. It doesn't have as much, you know. It doesn't have as much travel. Wow, it's an over travel stop, and I get my second round off and everything else quite a bit easier. You can see that I have the same hoe grip on it, and I really do enjoy these guns. Of course, this one's been out in the field a little bit too much, and I haven't been cleaning this thing up because it's got a little rust on it. I don't know if that's going to be picked up in the camera or not, but anyway, they're great guns. I need to clean that one up a little bit, but normally I would not roll one of my rusted tint anything. I'd normally clean that up beforehand, but it's just it's the way it works. Anyway, this is Guns, Knives, and Watches, and this is what a race dragon is, and what a race dragon is to me and to the people that I used to be around. And it's just that competition target model, Ruger 1022. I mean Ruger 1022, Ruger Mark II or Mark III. Of course, we prefer the Mark IIs just because. Now, one of the other things that this one did, besides if it does have a full Volquartsen kit in it, it has the hammer and the bushing out of a Mark II, because that's one of the things that is another thing as far as just reliability and convenience, because this gun will actually fire. Let me make sure I can actually see that with the magazine out of it, which means the magazine disconnect has been removed, and that is something that I would recommend for everyone if it's legal in your state to do, because it is a pain in the rear as far as taking it apart and everything else, and putting your magazine in and pulling the trigger and and this, that, or the other, and it's like, oh my god. But I would definitely recommend, if it's legal in your state, to do it. This is Guns, Knives, and Watches, and I hope this video is better than the last one, because I'm telling you, that one on that SR22 was hard to do. I mean, it really was, because it's a good gun. It's great because my kids can shoot it. Mrs. Guns, Knives, Watches loves the form factor, loves that it's easy to cycle, loves all the things about it, and it's just not my thing. And if you really watch my videos, you can tell what's my thing and what isn't. This is Guns, Knives, and Watches, and have a good one.